Alright, so I'm still working in my scene. I've got some items here. I've got grasses. I've painted some grasses in the back. Now, if I make a giant brush, it's going to paint a lot of stuff in a lot of places, and sometimes things can get painted up. I'll show you. Sometimes things can get painted up in the treetops and that sort of thing. So if you look, notice that I've got things up in this tree. There's grass on this geometry. Well, I wouldn't want that, and I can use my selection tool, and if I have to go in and remove some of these, I may have to do that. Now, I did that on purpose so you could see that it was just everywhere, but you may have this problem. You can also use this selection tool, and whatever you have active, let's say if I wanted to get the only thing that's active over here will be what's selected. Now I just use that particular type of grass. So if I happen to make my brush large, and if all this grass is that particular type of grass, let's say I didn't like that, I could delete that. And if it's gotten crazy and I just don't like what I've done, I can go back and just delete that out. It's not going to show up so much. It's not going to show up over here like a lot of objects. Now I have my trees and my logs and all that sort of stuff in this area, so I can bring in my logs and my trees and all of that. But the items that I'm painting, I'm not necessarily going to be. I could select all of them like this as kind of a whole, and obviously if I've made a giant mess by using that big brush, I can grab that. And so what I want to do is, as an object, I'm going to be very, I want to use that to paint grasses all over the place, but I also want to be very selective on the type of things that I do around my core what we call hero pieces. So again, I'm going to choose specific grasses, and if I want flowers or grasses, I'm going to put them up here, and I'm going to use them to populate my scene. I probably wouldn't use a giant brush like this. Go back and bring my brush size down just to kind of see where I'm at, and then I would go in and I would try to paint around my object. Now I want some things just in this area, and I'm going to kind of go around this area, and I might try to hide the edges of objects. So hide the edges. I'm going to make this smaller, try to put some grasses. I always like to try to hide the edges of things so that if you're looking at it, it's kind of not obvious that it's just sticking there on the ground. When I get too close, I do end up going to that single added, where I can just click around here, and then I can just kind of bring some things out with a little bit more control. If I want to build some things up in this area. Now, obviously, these are for things like grass, where you've got a lot of instances of basically the same thing. There's not a lot of variety here, but I could try to make some patterns and put some things around. Remember, a lot of the time when I'm going to save this, and if I go to play, I start my scene out as a character, and I can move through this environment. Remember, it is going to be grass that's used here in the scene. So I'm going to be low in this. Well, I'm going to be, basically I'm not going to be staring at the grass usually. I'm going to be just moving through the scene and interacting with the objects in the scene. I'm not necessarily going to be looking at the grass. It's just kind of filling in. But if I do get low, get low in the ground, it will kind of take up some of that space. So I'm going to just focus over here on kind of what I'm going to be looking at. Again, I am making a scene for a cinematic versus a gameplay in this particular case. If I use my lit scene, I can kind of see how it looks. So I'm going to just slowly and surely begin to build in my environments, build in my additional objects, put in some flowers where I want them if I want them there, try out these different grasses, fluff grass, so I might deactivate that, and then use this and drop in some fluff grass, maybe increase my, so I can populate some areas just to give a little bit of variety as I click and just add that in. So for just some variety, not too much of the same thing everywhere. If I want to add, I can bring both of those in, and then I can grab them all. This is when it speeds things up. So I'm adding a little bit of variety here and there. I'm trying not to do too much, and then I could just kind of paint in some of that out here where it doesn't matter so much, where I'm just kind of filling in those gaps. And so I can do that out in this area just to fill in those areas like that. And if I want to add, since this is a cemetery, I might want to add some key flowers in certain spots. So in my scene, that's kind of how I'm going to be using the foliage brush with these different props. The rocks doesn't work so well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be going back to my geometry here. I'm going to save my scene, and I'm actually going to be bringing rocks in one at a time and building up my scene by creating kind of a backdrop here. And notice as I move this rock around, it kind of changes. The materials change. So I can take a rock like this, make sure, and I hold down Alt, and I'm going to drag with my right arrow, and I can drag that over and pull out another instance of it. Now I'm going to push them together because I'm going to create a base around this, and I can also use my rotation tools to change the directions of the rock as well, and I can use E and R to scale it down or scale it up. So if I wanted to scale it up or scale it down, so what I want to try to do is build like an arc up a triangle around this, kind of like a backdrop. So these will be my base objects, and I'm going to just kind of tweak them, move them around a little bit. I just want to make sure the geometry is not running into my actual. I'm going to change that to move in the world and move this down, and I'm just going to kind of keep moving things around a little bit by bit, and I know that I'm just going to try to position that around. Not want it to be too big. And this is kind of where we get into the painter mode, what I call kind of like, if you know who Bob Ross is, as you start to construct your scene, you're thinking, where do I want these things to be? So I'm going to kind of think, oh, I want one over here or over there. And I'm going to start to just move things around that fit into my environment. I'm just going to put them where I want them. I'm look at their shape and their size, and I'm just going to keep adding more. I want to make sure it doesn't obstruct or it doesn't cut into the objects here. I might shape it to fit around this a little bit better. I may make it bigger, I might make it smaller. It just depends on what I think looks right at this time, because I don't really know. I just have an idea, basically. And so now I've got them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and select all of these. And then what I'm going to do is hold down Alt, and I'm going to lift up and actually lift up all of these rocks on top of one another. And what I want to be able to do is then take them and scale them down individually and then reposition them kind of back onto the rocks, so I can build more like a build it up a little bit more like rocks being stacked on one another, and I might push the rocks in, because in the end it won't look as bad as you might think once the lighting hits and everything. So I'm going to start to build these up to build like a backdrop to this I do want these to intersect. I don't want there to be any gaps. So I'm just going to kind of start to move them around a little bit and build this up. I'm not going to have them, I don't want them to look like they're just sitting there necessarily. I mean just floating. I don't want them to look like they're floating. I want them to look like they're forming kind of a backdrop or an arch. So these here, this one, and this one, I might then hold down Alt and lift them up. I kind of just keep building and shaping these a little at a time. I might push it in, might push this down, and I might go up one more with it, or I might scale this one up a little bit and might flatten it out, maybe make it a little skinnier. Then that's what you can do. You can change these rocks as you like, as you begin to lift and push and pull them up and around to make the scene be what you want it to be. So this headstone up here, it might need another one where I hold down Alt and lift. And I might do this very same thing. I'm going to do this very same thing to kind of just push and pull these around with my trees. So here's a tree. I'm going to hold down Alt. I might move that tree up and over here. I might scale it down or scale it up. I can scale it from the ground up, scale it from the ground down. So maybe this is a younger tree. I'm going to orient it to kind of give it some different orientations. Maybe I tip it a little bit. Maybe it's not growing perfect. So I'm going to be just thinking about the scene constantly as I build this as my composition. And so this tree here, I might, again, drag a couple more over here. Maybe make sure it's in the ground. Maybe push another version back there. And a lot of this stuff is going to be, just copy this. And I'm going to just alternate them, just rotate things so that it's not the same orientation all the time. Look at it from different points of view. These are all in a row. Maybe I want to move one back. Or just add more. Alright, maybe I want a couple here. So variation is important. Making sure I don't have duplicates all around. So I'm starting to build this, and I'm thinking about how does it look from my camera's perspective. Maybe I leave some gaps. Maybe this would be a waterfall or something. Or maybe I want to add another tree in this area, like so. So I'm going to continue to build this up. I might add some larger rocks out here. So I think I want to add another rock out here, but I want this to be bigger. So I'm going to scale it up. And so this might be another object out. Maybe it's sticking out of the ground out here, and I just make a few more of them in this area to kind of make a spot where it's kind of have a nice background. Give it some variation and some lift. And maybe there's a path through here where people go. I might want to go back to my landscape painting, and maybe I want to paint a path. Maybe I want to make that look like mud. Maybe I've got a lava pattern on here, so if I do paint in this space, it's not going to paint directly. So maybe people walk through this area, and maybe they walk in and around, and that's kind of a trail back to where they're working. So I can make these trails where people might work, perhaps they work, perhaps they come around over here, perhaps they walk over in this way, and so I can kind of start to build this out a little bit. And just as I go along, I'm using my imagination to kind of let my just kind of, I'm going to put some mud in that area. Maybe it's wet around the base of this. Add a little bit of variation. Maybe just add some color. Maybe just even some spots here and there. Maybe some spots in the back. But mostly I'm going to just focus on kind of what I'm doing in this spot. And right now, make sure I save my scene. I go back to my geometry, and notice how it's starting to kind of come alive.